Aslında ama zaten linki paylaşmadığımız için henüz şey değil, kimse gelmez. Yani hemen şey yapabiliriz.
Gökçe istersen biz ilk slaytını bir dene.
Ben share screen yapacağım değil mi?
Evet, sen share screen yap. Ardından bir stop yap. Çünkü benim 3 slaytlık seni anlatacağım bir slaytım var. Ardından ben share screen'i bitiririm.
Eyvah. Bir saniye. Yani share screen çalışır diye düşünüyorum. Sen istiyorsan başlat. Ben çünkü bir değişiklik yapmam gerekiyor.
Okay, tamam. Okay. Okay, welcome back. Welcome back, everyone. So now we are starting our lecture, which is week 9. We will talk about natural gas disruptions. And let me share my screen now. So this is the 9th week that we are doing. What we are trying to do, I'll tell you later. So this is where we are now. We will talk about natural gas disruptions and European experience and how it changed European policies and how Europe may change global policies through its new policies. And for example, after the COVID-19, maybe Europe will going to go more on Green Deal, and this will probably create scale. Will change the regional countries, Turkey, UK, and others, and then it may create the scale to change global energy policies. Before that, we are talking with a very important expert, Gökçe Mete, not the gas disruptions, but about EU policies. She's one of the most knowledgeable person about EU policies. So she has a book. Last year, I think it was published, Energy Transitions and the Future of Gas in the EU. And there's a huge amount of new subjects she can talk about. She knows a lot, so you can ask her questions. Our main focus will be the path of these European policies, how Europe energy policies evolved and the cornerstones of these policies, and Green Deal, hydrogen, and other important issues. Why? Because EU regulations has shaped, for example, Turkey's energy policies too. So how EU regulations was shaped is very important. And this also created reverberations across the world in other countries, in Africa, in Asia. And I think we have one major question that can EU play a critical role in energy transition? That's their challenge. And we have to understand whether they have the muscles and ideas to make this energy transition possible for the others as well. Because, you know, EU is committed to be carbon neutral continent by 2050. That's an ambitious target. And, you know, there are discussions around border adjustment tax and US response to it. And there's a very important new Green Deal that we are all anxious about, how it will evolve, how it will change. Next week, EU will talk about whether it will delay some of the parts of these policies or not by 29th of April, I guess. And there's another very important subject, which is hydrogen. And with hydrogen, we want to know about whether a hydrogen society is possible and how EU will going to fund the money in which projects and how it will create the scale. Will it be like distribution companies or cars, transportation? That will be important. And this is basically what we would like to hear from Gökçe is the future of energy influenced by EU, how it influences and how it will influence. So, ladies and gentlemen, I leave the floor to very kind Dr. Gökçe Mete.
Thank you, Barış. Thank you for the introduction as well. Well, I'm currently based in Brussels, and I'm working at the International Energy Charter. But I published my book. Well, it was written before I've joined, but I've finalized it here, and it's out since last year. So I'll talk about some of the findings and recommendations I've included in my book. And at the same time, I'll provide an update on what has been happening since the book was published. So I will try to now share my screen with you. I guess you can see it now. Good, perfect. Okay, so so let's start. This is going to be, I think I'm going to talk about for about maybe 40 to 50 minutes, and hopefully we will have again an opportunity to have questions. Correct, Barish? Will we? Yeah, we will have questions and answers. So I'll talk about, so what I'll do today is I'm going to provide kind of an overview of what's been happening, let's not just look at today, but I think it's useful to have an understanding of the evolution of EU policy, legislative and strategy instruments. Now I talk about an energy architecture because then we also have the infrastructure in it, how that infrastructure has been shaped and how it has been changing. So we'll have kind of an overview of that. We'll look at relevant policy and legislative instruments. We'll have a look at the current situation, and we'll also have some kind of projections towards the future and how things might evolve in the future, kind of the next 2 decades and towards 2050. So here I've actually provided a list for you to be aware of the kind of the documents that are relevant for the last decade. So the different policy, there's so many, of course, policies and strategies and communications, but these are the key instruments, and these are the things that I will talk about. So if you want to go and have a deeper look into the topics, you can go and find these online. And here I first wanted to start with kind of the framework for 2030. So to tell you more about the targets. And this, what I show here is a target, the 2020 target and 2030 target prior to the clean energy package, which is the latest kind of big chunk of legislative initiative that had already revised this target. So the targets are there as an ambition. They are a decade, 2 decades, they're going to happen in the future. So we put a target and we try to get there, how we get there. And then these trajectory is also revised quite regularly. If you're doing well, the ambition, and then of course, if the technology is there, the ambition is increased. So for 2020, which is this year, the ambition put in place was to have 20% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, 20% share of renewable energy in the energy mix, 20% improvements in energy efficiency, so 20% reduction in energy consumption, and 10% more interconnections in terms of infrastructure. So with EU-wide, this is an EU-wide picture, and we can say that more or less these targets at the EU level, not necessarily at each member state, but the EU level have been achieved, but we'll have a better picture at the end of the year because national energy and climate plans are still being submitted. Now, the 2030 targets were initially set for 40% reduction of gas emissions. This is important because the 2030 targets is all what we're going to talk about this year in Brussels. So initially they were set as 40% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, 27% share of renewable energy, 27% reduction in energy consumption. Now, these have been revised. We'll talk about it. They are now 32% for renewable energy and 32.5% for energy efficiency. And the discussions on the share of reduction for greenhouse gas emissions is in discussion, currently it's under an impact assessment. So we will see the final kind of ambition later on this year, hopefully. So the long-term strategic goals for 2050, as Boris mentioned, it's set as climate neutrality. So the ambition is to be climate neutral. And this will, as stated in the clean energy package, will be achieved through this kind of 7 strategic areas. And we'll be coming back to these areas a few times during the presentation, but the areas we're looking at: energy efficiency, of course, more and significant amount of further deployment of renewables, mobility, ensuring sustainable industry, circular economy, making sure that we have the infrastructure and interconnections in place to optimize the energy system, bioeconomy and making sure there are natural carbon sinks like forestry, and also relying on technologies such as carbon capture and storage to address remaining emissions. And then the EU energy policies, towards achieving 2030-40, they also include completing the internal market. So that is an ongoing work. But add to that now, we also have a sector coupling, sector integration strategy. So I'll talk about that today. It's very important for achieving carbon neutrality. We'll also need to boost energy performance of buildings and making best use of indigenous energy sources in the EU, with particular focus on renewable energy, offshore wind, solar, and hydrogen in the near future, green hydrogen in particular. It's also important to highlight that the EU policy objectives in the energy and climate sphere includes boosting and strengthening the external energy relations in particular with the neighboring countries. That includes our country, Turkey, and ensuring that the security of supply is maintained, and research and development and demonstration projects continue. And this is done through making use of funds. There's a Horizon 2020 fund. There are other technology plans and innovation funds that are made available to achieve that. And I've mentioned already, like I've presented a decade of policy instruments. It goes way back before 2010, but we have some significant achievements towards the energy transition, and that shows that the kind of the architecture put in place works. We definitely have safer supplies in the EU. We have a better solidarity principle. The member states are working together. There are better interconnections, and the level of ambition after the clean energy package have been published in 2018. The ambition for 2030 is already increased, and it will increase further, but it's already increased. So there's an agreement between the member states that further ambition should be in place to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. The work towards 2050 climate neutrality is underway, and you've mentioned COVID-19 and Barış. Indeed, we may see some delay in some aspects of the Green Deal being materialized, and not significant delays, but there is inevitably, there will be areas. There had been an announcement on areas already that will not be delayed, and hydrogen and sector integration will be one of them. So the work towards sector integration will continue as part of kind of green growth strategy. We have in the EU already a very active consumer base. It's actually an emerging peer-to-peer market, and that will continue. Further digitalization, there are again the instruments in place to achieve that. And the hardware, that's what we call internal energy market hardware, which is the infrastructure. And there are also mechanisms to make sure that that takes place. We have the projects of common interest to facilitate the administrative burden on important projects that could bring common benefits for Europe towards achieving its climate and energy objectives. There are funds available, and then we already have the software mostly that had been put in place. The Clean Energy for All Europeans package covered revised already most of the relevant legislation, the Renewable Electricity Directive, the Energy Efficiency Directive. We'll need further software. By software, what I mean is legislation. Software will need further software for hydrogen, and I'll make some recommendations towards it, building on what I've said in the book towards the end of my presentation. And we also have a climate law, and we'll talk about that too. What else has been happening is that we also have some institutions and mechanisms and finance available for addressing socioeconomic impacts of the clean energy transition, especially in regions that are heavily dependent on fossil fuels, like coal regions, carbon intensive regions. There are funds and mechanisms there to help them to avoid kind of injustice, social injustice happening there. There are mechanisms to address also the specific issues of islands, and we also have already in place a very effective and functioning EU emissions trading system. And then I will also talk about that a little bit. Now, I don't want to, I'm a lawyer by background, and I've been working on policy. I don't want to bore anyone with law, but I have to mention the Lisbon Treaty, and I'll do that because this treaty is the backbone, it's the constitution of the EU, let's say. And here we see that the EU, the Commission, the Union, and the member states have shared competence on energy issues. So the decisions can be taken at the EU level. But at the same time, the member states have flexibility, let's say, in deciding on their own energy mix. So we set the targets, and how you get there is how they get there is up to the member state. They can choose a nuclear pathway, they can choose a hydrogen pathway. It depends on geography, it depends on public acceptance issues. That I wanted to highlight because it's part of, I think it's an important part of our understanding of how the EU energy architecture operates, so that not everything is uniform, of course. Again, I will not go through legislation so much, but I wanted to show you this kind of legislative timeline of, of different directives and regulations, sort of the EU energy law, or ECI, as they're often called, as it's often called. I wanted to show that because I wanted to show that things don't happen overnight. So it took decades of discussions, decades of trying and testing and creating a market. So with each package, we've seen since the 1990s, we have, this is the liberalization journey. So we are seeing opening up of markets, we are seeing emergence of national regulatory agencies, similar journey that we had experienced in Turkey as well, but with more interconnections, more integration of markets. Up to today, the clean energy package. And what is not here is that you're always seeing that electricity and gas being separate, and it's often the electricity that is addressed more first, and then it's gas. And that's what happened with the clean energy package. It addressed the issues with it, electricity directive. It brought it up to date, but the changes required for the gas package is still not there. But what we might see going forward, that electricity and gas market regulation and hydrogen as well becoming more integrated. So we might see more competition between these different energy carriers and sources. But I wanted to show this journey, and I also wanted to mention, so of this list, actually, I will only talk about briefly about third energy package, and I'll also touch upon clean energy package because it's the latest. And with the third energy package, I won't go into the details, but I want to emphasize kind of EU level action. So this is the first time this package was put in place in 2009. And in this package, we see that there's more cooperation at the EU level. So there's a new agency called ACER. It's the Agency for Cooperation of European Energy Regulators that oversees and monitors the process of regulatory developments. And then, of course, among many other tasks. And then we also have a kind of EU level institution for transmission system operators for gas and electricity. Now, I mentioned this because to date, they've operated also separately. What they do is they do a 10-year network development plan. So they oversee the infrastructure needs, or European-wide infrastructure needs. And they do that, and they revise this network development plan every 2 years. That had been done separately for gas sector and for electricity sector. Now, since last year, this is the first time they're actually working together to optimize the system. So we're going to see more interlinkages between gas and electricity system. What does it mean? That means that where we can actually decarbonize a sector of the economy by using hydrogen or by using decarbonized gases or renewable gases like biogas, then we would maybe not need to build electricity transmission lines. So that planning will be happening together between these kind of European-wide institutions. So that's important to mention, and that we can do that thanks to the third energy package, enabling an EU-wide action in this area. Then I will briefly mention the Energy Union. So this is important, and this Energy Union was established in 2015, and it sort of forms the backbone of travel of direction of EU energy policy. And it is not a static kind of instrument. So we have an update still regularly on the achievements towards the Energy Union, but it's a vision, let's say. And initially it did sound just as a vision, and that's what I'm seeing every time when the Commission produces a policy, a strategy, everybody says, where's the action? It comes, the action follows, but I think it's important to be patient, and we have seen energy union objectives being translated into action within the clean energy package. So before that, let's look at the energy union. So that's a vision, that's a policy tool that will help the EU, that is helping the EU already to work towards a low carbon, secure, affordable energy system. It has many different aspects that some of them are related to investor confidence, some of them are about consumers, but the key areas we can put them together as this 5 dimensions of the energy union, and we keep hearing that they are still there, they're still forming the kind of backbone of the direction of travel, as I said. So the 5 dimensions are that here, sort of the EU, kind of all the member states here are committing to working together under the energy union by committing to build trust and working closely in terms of emergency, in terms of diversification of sources. And also they are promising that they will enable a fully integrated energy markets, which means that energy can flow in any direction without borders. They are committing to energy efficiency. They are committing to decarbonizing the economy, that they will put in place policies to cut emissions, and they are committing to research, innovation, and competitiveness. And as I said, initially it just sounded as words, but then it translated into action under the Clean Energy Package. The Clean Energy Package puts the energy union into action. And that is, so Clean Energy Package, it's a big document, and it revised a number of legislative instruments. And these legislative instruments have been first announced in 2008, and they've been embedded in law in 2019. And it really forms an important contribution towards the 2050 objective. Here is a list of legislative instruments that have been revised. One moment, because I have to, increase the brightness of my screen. Okay, so with the Clean Energy Package, what it did is that I've already mentioned the 3rd Energy Package. So the 3rd Energy Package included Electricity Directive, we also have a Renewable Electricity Directive, Energy Efficiency Directive. They were already in place. So the Clean Energy Package updated them. We didn't have kind of a new legislation, but we had recast legislation. So it revised certain aspects of them to increase the kind of ambition we have. So we have the Renewable Electricity Directive that have been revised. We'll have a look at that very briefly. Electricity market design, energy efficiency. It gave more powers to ACER, the regulatory agency for national regulatory, the platform for national energy regulatory agencies. It has more powers now in terms of, in particular, monitoring, and we also have a governance regulation now that's new. But apart from that, none of them were new, but more like improvements, let's say, in line with the energy union. With the Electricity Directive, the biggest kind of innovation is that it also, again, the member states agreed, and it's been legislated, that the consumers will get smart meters, they're going to benefit from dynamic pricing, and state aid to fossil fuel plants will be phased out. That's also very important. And they will also tackle blackouts. That's an important aspect too. There's now a risk preparedness regulation. I won't go into the details of this, but it's there, especially I think with blackouts, we are familiar with that in our country, so it's good to know as an example. So we have a revision of the Renewable Energy Directive. If you'd remember, I mentioned that the target for share of renewables by 2030 was 27%. Now the Clean Energy Package made it 32%, so there's an upward increase. Again, this will be further revised actually in the coming years. We also have some provisions here to make cooperation among member states in joint renewable energy projects easier, so that regulation addresses more of the kind of joint support scheme issues. And then we also have actually a revision of the Energy Efficiency Directive. But before I come to that, I want to talk about the Energy Emissions Trading System Directive. I want to talk about it when we're talking about electricity, because that covers most of our kind of electricity sector emissions. So the ETS is important to mention, and it's important to mention because it is world's like first and largest carbon market mechanism. It puts a price on carbon. It's a cap and trade mechanism. But I wanted to show it because it actually works, and it covers currently power stations. It covers energy industry intensive sectors. It also covers aviation between EU member states. And it was put in place in 2005. And between then and now, it actually lowered the sectors covered by the ETS they actually have 21% less emissions. So it shows that it works. And I'm mentioning this because it's going to be revised significantly under the Green Deal. And if the revisions go ahead, it will actually result in 43% lower emissions in the sectors covered. And let's also have a look at the governance regulation that was part of this. I'm going back to the Clean Energy Package. And Clean Energy Package also introduced something called the governance regulation, because we have, again, a target, a plan, an ambition to get there. The member states can choose their own methods to get there. Under the Lisbon Treaty, they have a right to do so. It's a shared competence. But the governance regulation, what it does, it enables the Commission to have a better view of what they actually want, what they will do. So you can decide on what you will do to get there, but then you have to also make it clear how you will get there. So the member states are now under this governance regulation that came with the Clean Energy Package. They're going to draft this 10-year, they have already drafted their 10-year national energy and climate plans and explain how they will exactly get there, the climate neutrality, let's say. 2030 and 2050 targets. And that gives the Commission an opportunity to review them and see any inconsistencies, revise the targets if necessary, but also issue recommendations for member states. We've also had a revision of the Energy Efficiency Directive with the Clean Energy Package. So we have an upward revision for 32.5 for reduction of energy consumption. But there are also stronger rules there are also revisions for energy efficiency labeling, building performance, so that it's not just one directive, there are a set of directives that are relevant for energy efficiency, increased ambition, let's say, towards climate neutrality. And we also have energy efficiency first principle. So I'm going to briefly jump to another topic. We're still within the climate and energy perspective. We're still there, but I wanted to just emphasize how ambitious the EU is and how that it covers all the sectors of the economy. We have also a sustainable finance package. So this is a package that was proposed by the Commission in 2018. Work towards achieving some aspects of it is in place. What it basically does is that it proposes legislative instruments to establish a unified sustainable finance taxonomy. Now, this taxonomy, we have the first drafts already ready. It's a non-exhaustive list of economic activities that can be classified as green. And you do that by assessing their contribution to sustainability and climate change mitigation objectives. It doesn't mean that activities that are not in the list will be banned, but it actually gives a signal to investors. And it's another proposal was to create is to create low carbon and positive carbon impact benchmarks for companies, so that you can actually have a benchmark assessment for carbon footprint of each company. And furthermore, another legislative proposal is there to make it mandatory to disclose for the asset managers and institutional investors to disclose the environmental and social governance factors in their risk processes. So what the Sustainable Finance Package does is that it actually tells the investors to choose green products, and it makes it easier for them to know which products are green. So now let's go to the meat of the presentation. I think this is interesting. The journey was good to come here, but I think the Green Deal is very exciting. It is an instrumental piece of work that can really change how we consume and use energy significantly, and our kind of impact and the impact of energy sector on climate So the Green Deal is important. It's been published with the new commission that took office last year. And what it does is that it says that it will revise, it foresees a revision of all the relevant legislation on energy and climate. So we've already seen with the Clean Energy Package, we've revised the Renewable Electricity Directive, we've revised the Energy Efficiency Directive, we've revised the Electricity Package. They will all be revised again, because the Green Deal sets the ambition even higher. So with a higher ambition and with a better visibility of technology and commitment by member states and our impact and the impact that is happening, the climate, the sheer size of climate crisis, I think push the kind of Green Deal agenda. One important aspect of the Green Deal is that it also foresees a smart sector integration strategy. So, and this work has already started. And the Commission will present in the second quarter of this year how we will have electricity, gas, and heating working as one system. I'll talk about it in a minute, what it exactly means, because it's really, really important. And other areas of Green Deal, it includes circular economy, it includes building renovation, it includes sustainable investments, zero pollution, ecosystems, biodiversity, farm to fork strategy, so agriculture and transport. So what I mean by that, so as a result of the Green Deal, this kind of the political declaration, again, that shows the journey towards climate neutrality. As a result of the Green Deal, all the regulations that are related to these areas I've mentioned, circular economy, buildings, sustainable industry, all of that will be revised. All the legislative instruments will be revised to make sure that all the policies are traveling in the same direction towards climate neutrality, let's say. And then there's also a leave no one behind policy. So there's actually a large fund, just transition mechanism, to address any kind of negative socioeconomic impacts on carbon intensive regions. So that fund will be available for them to kind of build capacity and repurpose some of the talents, some of the new technologies that will be in place. We also have a reform of the ETS emissions trading system. That's why I mentioned it earlier. And this is important because the ETS have worked. Putting a price on carbon works. So it's important that it becomes a little bit more ambitious and it becomes more consistent across the different sectors of the economy. So we have a carbon price that is economy-wide. And that's what exactly is in plan. We'll see, it's not set in stone now, but there will be a revision of the Green Deal envisaged revision of the EU ETS directive, and it may now cover maritime sector, road transport, aviation even, international aviation and construction materials as well. So we might see expansion of this, but it's also important that that we have fair rules in place to address the carbon leakage question. And then there's also a new reform that will make sure that the auctioning revenues from this trading system are used for innovative technologies, are used for climate action under the Innovation Fund. So again, this process is not final yet, but it's important to mention because it can change a lot of things, and it's also related to the carbon border adjustment mechanism. Now, to take things further, the Commission, the new Commission announced the climate law in 2020 this year, part of the Green Deal. Why it's different? The climate law is the first time actually we are making the climate neutrality objective legally binding. It is legally binding. It's set under in law under climate law, but beyond that, it will also say the climate law will also put in place that how we will get there, how we will reach the 2050 target. So what is happening at the moment is that we have a comprehensive impact assessment. So the climate law will have an impact on the emissions reduction target for 2030. Now, there are talks that this 2030 ambition for reduction of greenhouse gas emissions should be 55%. what the Commission is currently doing is that it's doing an impact assessment to understand the economical impacts of that, socio-economical impacts, and then vis-a-vis doing that or doing nothing. So what's the cost of climate inaction? So that will be assessed, and therefore towards the end of the year, after this assessment is done, we will be able to see what will be the outcome for the targets towards 2030. And it changes a lot for a lot of countries. So that 40% reduction, 55% reduction is huge. So that will be a process to like watch closely, let's say. And what do we have under climate law? What is the action towards climate neutrality? So here are the areas that will be put in place, again, strategic areas that will be important to reach climate neutrality. The EU will be investing in environmentally friendly technologies. That includes, for instance, hydrogen. It will support industry, hard to abate sectors to innovate. It will be rolling out mechanisms to promote cleaner public transport and private mobility. Buildings will be more efficient, and they also will be working with international standards to achieve kind of global impact in achieving climate neutrality. And one of the kind of how do we get there question, one of the responses is system integration. Sector coupling or sector integration or system integration, there are many ways of calling it, is key for climate neutrality. Why? Because it optimizes the energy system. Therefore, we can actually optimize the costs. And how it is being done, with sector coupling, we are linking different forms, different energy forms and different energy carriers, like electricity, gas, liquids, heat, with the end use sector. So like buildings, mobility, industry, and agriculture. So an example is electrification. Well, let's be before that, like a sector coupling or sector integration, we've already been doing that. Gas to power, for instance, that is sector coupling, like that you produce and combine heat and power plants. But how we can achieve that in a larger scale for climate neutrality is that you can do it with electrification. So you are electrifying heat through heat pumps. You are electrifying mobility with electric vehicles or some of the industry processes that can be achieved by power-to-X technologies. So power-to-X, it's called power-to-X because it could be power to gas or power to liquids. So decarbonization through renewable gases or renewable liquids. So you can do it with hydrogen, renewable ideally, and synthetic fuels. You can do that, do sector coupling, you can achieve sector coupling by, for instance, better use of waste and resources. For instance, you can use the waste from industrial processes, the waste heat from industrial processes for district heating. You can use agricultural waste for biogas, which we're doing already. You can use waste from data centers in district heating. Another way is to use Another way of sector integration is decentralizing energy flows. So you are using electricity stored in electric vehicles to put it back and sell it back or trade it back to the grid, or enabling bidirectional heat flows in the district heating system. So sector integration includes all of that. What I will do today, I won't go into all of these, we don't have time. I think especially decentralized energy flows is a very interesting topic, it requires another day of discussions. But I'll talk about power-to-X a little bit and renewable gases. So we have biogas and biomethane. These are not new technologies, so we're already producing biomass from manure, waste, and other products in landfill, such as landfill. And it has been historically used in electricity. But recently, we have a technology to purify biogas to biomethane level and actually use it in the existing gas transportation system safely. So biomethane has the same quality as gas, so methane can be used in the existing gas pipeline systems. And biogas and biomethane are actually carbon-free. They're carbon-free, but they can also result in negative emissions, so they're important. But then we have some issues. For instance, biomethane is still expensive because the purification technology is expensive. You have also energy efficiency, kind of conversion efficiency losses, but you also have issues with the availability of land to actually produce vast amounts of biogas. So they're important. So biogas and biomethane as part of sector integration will be very important. They're going to be important for geographically kind of end-of places. Denmark is investing a lot on that, but it won't be enough to fully decarbonize the gas system or the economy, so to speak. But none of these technologies that we're talking about are enough alone. None of them are silver bullet, but they are there and they're complementary, and they should compete. We will now talk about hydrogen as one of the Power-to-X sector integration pathways towards decarbonization, because Barış, initially you were asking, do they have the muscles and technology and the funds to be there to do that? I would say the technology is there. I would definitely say the will of the industry is there, and the policymakers is arriving there, let's say, to do that. I mean, the will is there, the means are, what we need is, again, enabling policy and regulatory and financial framework. And I think it is on the way. And let's talk about hydrogen example, and we can kind of justify how it can be done. So the green hydrogen, there are different methods of producing hydrogen. So we can produce it green from renewable sources or blue. Let's start with green, which is the preferred way to go, because it's it can be produced completely carbon-free from renewable electricity sources. So by using renewable energy as a feedstock via electrolysis technology, you can end up with a hydrogen, which is a gaseous material, has multiple uses. And I'll talk about the uses in a minute. So it can be done, it can be produced via an electrolysis technology. It's not a new technology, it existed for a while. It's a mature technology, but it's expensive. Electrolyzer itself is expensive, its operation is expensive, and in some locations, renewable electricity is expensive. It makes a lot of sense currently where you have excess electricity, like Denmark or coastal regions, the Netherlands, when you have a lot of excess electricity, it makes sense to produce it that way. And then of course, hydrogen is not a fuel that you can safely inject to every pipeline, sadly. Some pipelines across the EU continent, let's say, would need some refurbishment. Some may not be compatible at all. Some may be compatible to up to 10%, 20% blending at best case. So there's a cost of infrastructure as well to take into account before deciding on which pathway to choose for decarbonization. But these costs are expected to fall significantly. Let's remember when the renewable electricity was first entering in the market, it was very expensive, solar and wind. Look at that now. So it's expected that the cost of hydrogen electrolyzer technology and cost of renewables will further go down, so that hydrogen will be actually compatible with natural gas and electricity and blue hydrogen by 2030, 40, and even going further down by 2050. What we might also see, green hydrogen is interesting because we might also see an international trade of green hydrogen happening, especially in regions where low cost and ample renewable energy sources are available. North Africa, Middle East, even Turkey could in the future be exporters of green hydrogen to the countries like the EU, or other producers for Japan, some of the major kind of consumer countries, consumer centers, let's say. Another technology to produce hydrogen is blue hydrogen. Now, this is cheaper. Currently, this technology is cheaper than producing a green hydrogen in most cases. Again, this is not a new technology. We've been using and producing hydrogen from natural gas for decades. It's been in use. What is new here is that production of hydrogen through the steam methane process or also thermal reforming process, but with carbon capture and storage. So that makes a difference, because then the emissions most of the emissions can be captured by carbon capture and storage. You still have some CO2 emissions being released, so it's not necessarily carbon neutral technology, but it's halfway there. So in a way, it could provide, it is considered as a way to create demand, kickstart demand for hydrogen. So we have a market, we have economies of scale, and even since it uses CCS technology, it still reduces CO2 emissions than you would otherwise have with using natural gas. One other technology, and there are many other technologies for both electrolyzers and for blue hydrogen, but I'll mention kind of the more or less mature ones. The other method is pyrolysis. Pyrolysis is a bit less mature technology. It's more expensive currently, but it's a method of splitting carbon into hydrogen and solid carbon. So this is very low carbon, or can be carbon neutral. And what you do is you can either store the solid carbon, or you can use it, recycle it, and use it in some of the processes that uses carbon as a feedstock. But with blue hydrogen, you're still using natural gas, you're still using natural gas infrastructure. Yes, they are less CO2 emitting than natural gas itself, but there are still methane emissions, which are not insignificant. Here, I just have a slide on carbon capture and storage, but in the interest of time, I won't go really into details, but here, I provided here for you. What's important is that the success of blue hydrogen in particular depends on the availability of CO2 kind of technologies. So you need the geographical availability in terms of storing the CO2, so under the North Sea or salt caverns, wherever you can do it, and public acceptance. So in regions where these are not there, the best option would be using biomethane or green hydrogen. And the investments in CCS are slow across the world, but they are kickstarting. So we are seeing more and more demonstration projects taking place. Here I provided kind of a brief summary of why hydrogen matters, because you can actually use hydrogen. It has multiple applications, so you can use it as a feedstock in industrial processes. So you can replace like coal used in iron ore processes. You can use it in refining as a feedstock, so you can reduce a lot of the emissions, but it has system integration benefits, which means it can make renewable energy more efficient. So you can avoid the intermittency problem by using hydrogen as a storage. And hydrogen can actually also be reconverted into electricity. Again, there are conversion efficiency problems, but you can do that. You can store it as heat in a fuel cell. We have also mobility benefits, so it can be used as a fuel in heavy trucks and in personal mobility cars, but also it can be used to make synthetic fuels for aviation and maritime. So these are kind of the benefits and why it matters from a sector integration point of view. And why it matters and why we need it doesn't stop here, because there is benefits from sector integration in terms of cost. So you are avoiding expensive electricity transmission network investments in regions where you can produce hydrogen and where you can use the existing gas grid. You may not electrify if this is less costly, and then you get enhanced flexibility, as I said, because you have the opportunity to have both short-term and seasonal storage availability with hydrogen. And of course, it also has the benefits of making use of existing gas infrastructure. Again, not everywhere, but it enables kind of an opportunity. You're avoiding the decommissioning costs, so you can use the existing gas infrastructure, in some cases 100% for hydrogen. So after that, I want to just tell you where we are in terms of making it happen. So as I mentioned, the EU will publish its sector strategy for energy system integration. It will come in the second half of this year. And then it's expected, it's not formal, but it's expected, and I mentioned that in the book, that the gas package may be reopened. We might not see a recast gas package. We may see it, but we may not see it. It may be renamed. We might call it the decarbonization package. It can be called the sector coupling package, but it's timely. So we've seen the revision of electricity directive. We've seen the revision of renewable electricity directive, renewable energy directive. It's time that we revisit the gas directive. So it's expected that this will take place in 2021. Perhaps it may be delayed a little bit, better if it's not. But but sector coupling will likely to be addressed in legislative instruments under this decarbonization package, let's say. And then we might see some production or consumption targets for hydrogen or green or blue hydrogen. We might see some public procurement requirements for low carbon products to create demand. We might see a taxonomy to clarify exactly what is a green hydrogen, exactly what is blue hydrogen, and you do that by looking at their carbon credentials and carbon CO2 content, CO2 footprint. And to certify that, we might see guarantees of origins for hydrogen, and we might see standards for like measuring quality, and we might see a market being established for hydrogen, or some sort of rules to be clarified. Again, will we have third-party access to hydrogen pipelines? What will be the tariffs, etc.? We might see that. We might see some incentives to help this technology mature and reach economies of scale. So one way to do that might be that hydrogen could be integrated into the existing kind of gas target model, so gas market, or it might be a separate market, a hydrogen market could be created as a third market. So we have electricity market, gas market, and there might be a hydrogen market. So these are to be seen. But in the book, so when I wrote the book, the Green Deal wasn't there. So I finished my last draft in August, and it was published in January, so I missed that. But I did already included some recommendations there that the new package, which is going to play a really, really key role in achieving climate neutrality, should definitely explain what roles, as you mentioned, Barish, what role the distribution system operator or the transmission system operator will play in creating a hydrogen economy. And there are some considerations there. We have unbundling rules. So if hydrogen is considered production or conversion, then the TSO actually could not be involved. Will we have like some leeways from these rules? So these need to be clarified. We need to have a better understanding of tariffs and taxes, and that's important because now we're talking about hybrid energy carriers. So electricity and renewable gases should be able to actually compete. That requires us to revisit the electricity energy tax directive. We might also revisit some of the regulatory and administrative barriers on injections of hydrogen into gas grid. We might see how do we calculate tariffs, so I've already mentioned that, and how are we going to distribute the cost of upgrading the infrastructure if we will choose that way, that pathway. Again, we might need to look at in the future international aspects. How are we going to regulate the international trade of hydrogen, in particular quality measurement and safety and technical and safety standards, especially if we will use hydrogen in home in our home appliances with hydrogen boilers, etc. Again, these are kind of forward-looking recommendations, but I've included them in the book, some of them at least. So I wanted to mention that. And here we end up with the last slide, and I provided again the book, a copy of the book here, and here how you can get a copy, a hard copy or soft copy, and how you can get in touch with me. So I'm not sure, I don't have a watch around me, so I don't know if I kept up with the time.
You know, you did fantastic, so we have no problem with that one. So on the one hand side, you said about smart energy integration, and on the other hand, there is a separate hydrogen market in the making. Am I understood correctly?
No, so
it's not for sure, but the hydrogen may be a separate thing, is it?
So it may be. So that's what I'm hearing at the moment. That is not the Commission have not decided that whether hydrogen will it be part of the gas target model. So will we consider it gases? So are we going to revise the gas package in a way that we are not talking about natural gas anymore? We're talking about gases. So we're talking about renewable gas. We're talking about biogas, blue, green. Or are we talking about natural gas separately and hydrogen separately?
And if I see your book title, Energy Transitions and the Future of not natural gas, but gas in the EU.
Yes.
It's intentional, isn't it?
Yes, of course. So that's what I wanted to say. It's not future of natural gas, but future of gas. So gases, gas-use energy carriers.
Gökçe, now we can close the live session and we can go for our Q&A in the backwards. So thank you very much, Gökçe. It was excellent
Thank you for
presentation.
everyone joining. Thank you.
I want a podcast for each slide, okay?
Okay, we'll do it next